I used to think loyalty meant sacrifice, that being the responsible one was a badge of honor, and that family always came first, no matter the cost. But when the FBI called me on a Thursday morning asking why my pension benefits were being collected by someone living in Florida while I was working in Ohio, I realized my aunt had been using me in ways that could destroy everything I'd worked 30 years to build. My name is Cameron Mitchell, and this is the story of how the woman I trusted most in the world nearly stole my entire future. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the industrial town of Millbrook, Ohio, I learned early that family meant everything. Our neighborhood was full of multi-generational households where grandparents, parents, and children all lived within walking distance of each other, sharing Sunday dinners, babysitting duties, and financial responsibilities. My family was the poster child for this tight-knit community. 4 generations of Mitchells all looking out for each other. Or so I thought. My parents, Robert and Linda Mitchell, owned a small hardware store downtown that had been in the family for 60 years. They were the kind of people who knew every customer by name and never hesitated to extend credit during tough times. Hardworking, honest, salt-of-the-earth folks who believed that family loyalty was the foundation of everything worthwhile in life. My Aunt Beverly was my father's older sister, and she was the family matriarch in every sense of the word. At 68, she was a force of nature. Silver-haired, sharp-tongued, and absolutely certain that she knew what was best for everyone in the family. She'd never married, never had children, and had spent her entire adult life taking care of other people's families instead of building her own. When I was growing up, Aunt Beverly was the one who babysat me after school while my parents worked at the store. She taught me how to balance a checkbook, how to comparison shop for groceries, and how to stretch a dollar until it screamed. She was practical, no nonsense, and deeply committed to the idea that financial security was the most important thing a person could achieve. Money doesn't buy happiness, she used to tell me while we clipped coupons at our kitchen table, but poverty sure can steal it. Beverly had worked for 43 years as an administrative assistant at Millbrook Steel, the largest employer in our town. She was the kind of employee who never called in sick, never took vacation days, and knew every regulation in the employee handbook by heart. When the plant closed in 2019, throwing half the town out of work, Beverly was one of the few employees who had managed to fully vest her pension before the layoffs began. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. She was also the family's unofficial financial advisor. When my cousin Danny needed help buying his first house, Beverly co-signed his mortgage. When my Uncle Paul's medical bills piled up after his heart attack, Beverly quietly paid them off. When my parents needed to update the store's inventory system, Beverly loaned them the money without charging interest. She was generous, reliable, and always seemed to have a solution for every family financial crisis. Everyone looked up to her, trusted her, and turned to her when money got tight, including me. I had started working at Millbrook Steel fresh out of high school, following in the footsteps of half my graduating class. It wasn't glamorous work. I spent my days in the administrative offices, processing payroll and managing employee benefits, but it was steady, well-paying work with excellent benefits. Most importantly, it offered a pension plan that would allow me to retire comfortably at 65 if I could stick with it for 30 years. For a 19-year-old girl from a working-class family, that pension represented security I'd never imagined possible. My parents had always lived paycheck to paycheck, never able to save much for retirement. The idea that I could work for 3 decades and then live comfortably for the rest of my life felt like winning the lottery. I was 27 when the plant closed, just 8 years into my career, but still far from the 15 years I needed to be fully vested in the pension plan. The closure sent shockwaves through Millbrook that are still being felt today. Families that had worked at the steel plant for generations were suddenly unemployed, their pension plans frozen, their futures uncertain. But I was lucky. When Millbrook Steel shut down, their administrative operations were absorbed by Harrison Industries, a larger company based in Columbus. Harrison offered jobs to about half the administrative staff, including me. The pay was similar, the benefits were comparable, and most importantly, Harrison agreed to honor the pension contributions I'd already made at Millbrook. The transition wasn't easy. I had to move to Columbus, leave behind the tight-knit community where I'd grown up, and start over in a city where I didn't know anyone. But I was young, adaptable, and motivated by the knowledge that my pension was still on track. For 8 years, I worked at Harrison Industries, building a life in Columbus while staying connected to my family back in Millbrook. I visited every other weekend, called my parents twice a week, and always made sure to check in with Aunt Beverly, who had become increasingly isolated after the plant closure. Beverly had struggled more than most with the adjustment to retirement. She was only 61 when Millbrook Steel closed, too young to collect Social Security, but too old to easily find comparable work. Her pension from the steel plant was modest, and without the structure and purpose that work had provided, she seemed to drift.
My parents worried about her constantly. She'd become reclusive, rarely leaving her house except for grocery shopping and doctor's appointments. She'd stopped attending family gatherings, claiming she was too tired or didn't feel well. When I called her directly, she was often short, distracted, like she had more important things to do than talk to her niece. "She's depressed," my mother confided in me during one of my weekend visits. "Losing that job was like losing her identity. She doesn't know what to do with herself." I started making special effort to spend time with Beverly during my visits home. I'd take her out to lunch, help her with errands, and listen while she complained about how different everything was since the plant closed. She seemed grateful for the attention, and gradually she began to open up about her financial concerns. "I never thought I'd outlive my savings," she admitted during one lunch at the diner we'd been going to since I was a child. "The pension helps, but it's not enough to maintain the house and pay for all the medications I need now." I was sympathetic, but not particularly worried. Beverly had always been careful with money, and she owned her house outright. Even if her pension was modest, she should have been able to live comfortably if she was willing to make some adjustments. That's when she started asking questions about my job at Harrison Industries. "How does the pension system work there?" she asked one Sunday after family dinner. "Is it similar to what we had at Millbrook Steel?" I explained the basics: how contributions were matched, how the vesting schedule worked, how the benefits were calculated based on years of service and final salary. Beverly listened intently, asking detailed questions about the administration process, the paperwork involved, and how the pension fund tracked contributions and eligibility. "It's fascinating how these systems work. I spent 40 years contributing to one, but I never really understood the mechanics behind it." I was happy to share what I'd learned. Beverly had always been interested in financial planning, and I assumed her questions were just intellectual curiosity combined with concern about her own retirement security. Over the next several months, Beverly's questions became more specific. She wanted to know about the online portals that employees use to track their benefits, about the documentation required to make changes to beneficiary information, about the process for updating personal information in the system. "I'm thinking about consulting with some of my old coworkers about their pension questions," she explained. "A lot of them are confused about their options, and I thought I might be able to help them navigate the system." It seemed like a natural fit. Beverly had always been the person family members turned to for financial advice, and helping other retirees understand their benefits would give her a sense of purpose she'd been missing since leaving the workforce. When Beverly asked if she could list me as an emergency contact on some official forms, I didn't hesitate to agree. "It's just standard paperwork," she explained. "Since I don't have children of my own, I need to designate someone who can be contacted if there are questions about my accounts or if something happens to me." I signed the forms without reading them carefully. Beverly was family. She was knowledgeable about financial matters, and I trusted her completely. If she needed my signature to help other people understand their pension benefits, I was happy to help. What I didn't realize was that those forms weren't related to her pension consulting work. They were applications to add her as an authorized representative on my Harrison Industries benefits accounts. For the next 2 years, everything seemed normal. I continued working in Columbus, visiting Millbrook regularly, and maintaining my close relationship with Beverly. She seemed happier, more engaged, like she'd found new purpose in helping other retirees navigate their benefits. She talked frequently about the people she was helping, the complicated situations she was resolving, and the gratitude they expressed for her assistance. I never realized how much knowledge I'd accumulated over all those years, she told me proudly. It feels good to put it to use helping people who really need it. I was proud of her too. After years of watching her struggle with depression and isolation, it was wonderful to see her engaged and enthusiastic about something again. I should have been suspicious when she started talking about taking trips. Beverly had never been much of a traveler. During all her years at Millbrook Steel, she'd used her vacation time for practical purposes: doctor's appointments, home repairs, helping family members with various crises. The idea of traveling for pleasure had always seemed frivolous to her. But suddenly, at 65, she was planning weekend trips to Cleveland, week-long visits to see distant relatives in Michigan, and eventually a month-long stay with her high school friend Ruth, who had retired to Fort Lauderdale. "I've spent my whole life taking care of other people," she said, when I expressed surprise at this new wanderlust. "Maybe it's time I took care of myself for a change." The trip seemed to agree with her. She came back from each one refreshed, relaxed, full of stories about the people she'd met and the places she'd seen. She started dressing differently, buying clothes that were more colorful and fashionable than the practical outfits she'd worn for decades. She had her hair styled at an expensive salon instead of cutting it herself at home. Most notably, she seemed to have more money. Beverly had always been frugal to the point of being cheap. She clipped coupons, shopped clearance sales, and drove a 15-year-old car that she maintained meticulously to avoid having to buy a new one. But suddenly, she was eating at restaurants, buying brand-name groceries, and talking about replacing her old appliances. "The pension consulting work has been more lucrative than I expected," she explained when I commented on her improved circumstances. "Turns out people are willing to pay well for expertise in navigating these complicated benefit systems."
I was happy for her. After watching her struggle financially and emotionally since the plant closure, it was wonderful to see her thriving. If she'd found a way to monetize her knowledge and improve her quality of life, that seemed like a win for everyone. I was so focused on being proud of Beverly's transformation that I missed the red flags entirely. Like the fact that she never talked specifically about her consulting clients, never mentioned names or details about the cases she was working on. Like the way she changed the subject whenever I asked technical questions about the pension issues she was supposedly helping people resolve. Like the expensive new car she bought, claiming she'd gotten a good deal through a friend, even though it was a luxury model that cost more than she'd ever spent on anything in her life. I missed it all because I trusted her, because she was family, because she'd spent 43 years building a reputation for honesty and reliability that I never thought to question. The first hint that something was wrong came during a routine review of my Harrison Industries benefits account. I was 37 years old and had been with the company for 10 years. My pension was finally starting to look substantial. Not enough to retire early, but enough to give me confidence that I was on track for a comfortable retirement at 65. I logged into the employee portal quarterly to check my balance and make sure my contributions were being processed correctly. But when I logged in that Tuesday morning in March, something was different. According to the system, my pension benefits were being paid out to an address in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I stared at the screen, certain there had been a mistake. I'd never lived in Florida, never requested any kind of payout, never made any changes to my beneficiary information. I was still working full-time at Harrison Industries.
I wouldn't be eligible to collect pension benefits for another 28 years. I called the benefits department immediately. Ms. Mitchell, I'm showing that you submitted a hardship withdrawal request 6 months ago, the representative explained. Your pension benefits have been redirected to your new address in Florida as requested. I never submitted any hardship withdrawal request, I said, my voice rising with panic. I'm still employed here. I still live in Columbus. I have no idea what you're talking about. Let me pull up your file, the representative said. I could hear typing in the background. I see here that the request was submitted by your authorized representative, Beverly Mitchell, who provided all the necessary documentation to process the withdrawal. My blood turned to ice. Beverly Mitchell is my aunt. She's not authorized to make changes to my pension account. According to our records, she was added as an authorized representative 2 years ago. You signed the forms yourself. Those forms. The ones Beverly had asked me to sign to help with her pension consulting work. The ones I'd signed without reading carefully because I trusted her completely. I need to speak to a supervisor immediately, I said, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Of course, but Ms. Mitchell, I should let you know that if there's been some kind of fraud or unauthorized access to your account, you'll need to file a report with our fraud investigation department. This could be a matter for law enforcement. After I hung up with Harrison Industries, I sat in my office staring at my computer screen, trying to make sense of what I'd just learned. Beverly, the woman who had taught me the importance of financial responsibility, the aunt who had always been the most trustworthy person in my family, had stolen my pension. Not just taken a small amount. According to the benefits representative, she had submitted paperwork claiming I was facing financial hardship and needed early access to my pension funds. She had provided documentation showing that I'd moved to Florida and needed the money transferred to my new address. She had collected 10 years' worth of pension contributions, money that was supposed to fund my retirement 3 decades from now. The total amount was $127,000. Beverly had stolen $127,000 from my future, and she'd been living off that money for the past 6 months while I continued working and contributing to a pension fund that was no longer building benefits for me. I picked up my phone to call her, then stopped. What was I going to say? How do you confront someone who has systematically defrauded you while pretending to care about your well-being? Instead, I called the Harrison Industries Fraud Investigation Department and made an appointment to file a formal complaint. As I drove home that evening, my mind raced through all the signs I'd missed. Beverly's new financial security, her sudden interest in travel, her questions about pension administration, the forms she'd asked me to sign. Most painful of all, I thought about all the family gatherings where she'd asked about my job, my plans for the future, my retirement goals. I thought she was being supportive, interested in my success, but she'd been gathering information, learning about my benefits, figuring out how to steal them. The woman I'd trusted most in the world had spent 2 years planning to rob me of my financial security, and she'd done it all while pretending to love me. For 37 years, I'd believed that family meant protection, loyalty, unconditional support. I'd believed that the people who raised you, who claimed to love you, would never deliberately hurt you for their own gain. But as I sat in my apartment that night, surrounded by financial documents and trying to figure out how to rebuild a retirement plan that had been systematically dismantled by my own aunt, I realized that I'd been wrong about everything. This wasn't love. This wasn't family. This was theft. And it was about to have consequences that Beverly never saw coming.
I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Beverly's face, the woman who had taught me to balance a checkbook, who had bragged about my work ethic to anyone who would listen, who had hugged me tight and told me how proud she was of my financial responsibility. The same woman who had been cashing my pension checks for 6 months while I worked overtime to build a future she was systematically stealing. By 7 a.m., I was dressed and driving the 2 hours back to Millbrook. The Harrison Industries Fraud Department had scheduled me for an interview that afternoon, but first I needed answers that only Beverly could provide. I needed to look her in the eye and hear her explain how she'd convinced herself that stealing from her own niece was acceptable. I found her in her kitchen, making French toast and humming while she cooked. She was wearing a silk blouse I'd never seen before and had her hair freshly styled. She looked relaxed, content, like someone without a care in the world. Certainly not like someone who had just committed pension fraud using my niece's identity. "Cameron," she said brightly when she saw me. "What a wonderful surprise! You're just in time for breakfast. I was trying out this new recipe I learned from Ruth down in Florida." The mention of Florida made my stomach clench. "We need to talk, Aunt Beverly." Something in my tone must have alerted her because her smile faltered slightly. She set down her spatula and turned to face me fully. "Of course, sweetheart, what's on your mind? You look upset." I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshot I'd taken of my Harrison Industries benefits account. "My pension benefits are being paid to an address in Fort Lauderdale. Care to explain how that happened?" The color drained from Beverly's face so quickly I thought she might collapse. She gripped the counter behind her, her knuckles going white. For a moment, the kitchen was completely silent, except for the sizzling of French toast in the pan. "Cameron, I can explain." "Then explain," I said, my voice deadly calm. "Explain how my pension contributions are being paid to someone in Florida when I've never lived there, never requested a hardship withdrawal, and never authorized anyone to make changes to my account." Beverly's mouth opened and closed several times before any words came out. "It's not what it looks like. It looks like theft. It looks like you forged my signature on withdrawal paperwork and have been collecting my pension benefits for the past 6 months." "I didn't forge anything," she said quickly, desperation creeping into her voice. "You signed those forms yourself, remember? When I was helping with the pension consulting work? Those forms were supposed to be for your consulting clients, not to give you access to my personal accounts." Beverly sat down heavily at her kitchen table, suddenly looking every one of her 68 years. "I never meant for it to go this far. It started as just borrowing. I was going to pay it back." "Borrowing?" My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "You filed fraudulent hardship withdrawal paperwork claiming I was facing financial emergencies. You had my pension checks redirected to Florida. That's not borrowing, Beverly. That's fraud." She started crying then, but they weren't the gentle tears of remorse. They were the ugly, desperate sobs of someone who'd been caught and was scrambling for any excuse that might get her out of trouble. "You don't understand how hard it's been," she gasped between sobs. "When the plant closed, everything changed. My pension wasn't enough. I couldn't afford the house, the medications, the basic necessities. I was drowning, Cameron." "So you decided to drown me instead?" "I thought you wouldn't notice for years. You're only 37. You wouldn't be eligible to collect until you're 65. I thought I could take what I needed now and find a way to pay it back before you ever found out." The casual way she discussed stealing my future was breathtaking. "How much, Beverly? How much of my money have you taken?" She wiped her nose with a dish towel. "I don't know exactly." "How much?" Maybe 130,000 over the past 6 months?" The number hit me like a physical blow. $130,000, more than I made in 2 years. Money that had taken me 10 years to accumulate through careful contributions and employer matching. Before I could respond, my mother's voice came from the kitchen doorway. "Girls, what's all this shouting about?" I turned to see both my parents standing in the entrance, drawn by the raised voices. Mom was still in her robe, and Dad looked like he'd just gotten out of bed. "Beverly has been stealing my pension benefits," I said without preamble. "She's taken over $100,000 using forged paperwork." My parents stared at me like I'd just announced I was joining the circus. Dad shook his head slowly. "That's impossible. Beverly would never—" "Show them," I said to Beverly. "Show them the documentation you filed with Harrison Industries claiming I was facing financial hardship and needed my pension benefits redirected to Florida." Beverly burst into fresh tears. "I never meant to hurt anyone," she sobbed. "I was desperate. The pension from Millbrook Steel barely covers my expenses, and I needed surgery last year that insurance didn't cover, and the house needed a new roof." "So you stole from Cameron?" My mother looked genuinely confused, like she couldn't process what she was hearing.
I borrowed from her pension fund with the intention of paying it back, Beverly said, as if using different words would change the reality of what she had done. I've been investing the money, trying to grow it so I could return more than I took. Investing it? I laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Is that what you call those trips to Florida? The new car? The expensive clothes? You've been living off my retirement money and calling it investment?
Dad moved to Beverly's side, putting a protective hand on her shoulder. Now hold on, Cameron. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, I shouted, causing all of them to stare at me in shock. I had never raised my voice at my father before. She filed fraudulent paperwork with my employer, claiming to be my authorized representative. She submitted false documentation claiming I was facing financial hardship. She's been collecting my pension checks for 6 months while I continued working and contributing to an account that was no longer building benefits for me. My mother stepped forward, her voice taking on the soothing tone she'd used when I was a child having a tantrum. Sweetheart, Beverly has been helping people with their pension issues for years. Maybe there was some confusion with the paperwork. There was no confusion, I said, each word deliberate and clear. She admitted it. She told me exactly how much money she's taken and how she's been spending it. This isn't a paperwork error. This is systematic fraud. Beverly looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. Cameron, please, you're family. We protect each other. I made a mistake, but I can fix this. I can pay back every penny if you just give me time. Pay it back with what money? You spent it all on vacations and luxury cars and whatever else you thought you deserved more than I did. My father's face was growing red with anger, but not at Beverly. Cameron, that's enough. I won't have you talking to your aunt like she's some kind of criminal. She is a criminal. The words exploded out of me with 20 years of suppressed frustration. She committed pension fraud, identity theft, and wire fraud. Those are felonies, Dad. Federal felonies. She's family, Mom said firmly. Family doesn't send family to prison over money. I stared at my parents, these people who had raised me to value honesty and hard work, who had taught me that stealing was wrong no matter who did it. But apparently, those rules didn't apply when the thief was someone they loved. What about my family? I asked quietly. Where was the family loyalty when Beverly was forging my signature and stealing my future? Where was the family protection when she was setting me up to lose everything I've worked for? She didn't mean to hurt you, Dad said. She was desperate and she made a poor decision, but sending her to prison won't get your money back. Neither will pretending this never happened. Beverly stood up shakily, reaching out to touch my arm. Cameron, honey, I know I messed up, but you're my family. I've loved you since the day you were born. I taught you how to manage money, how to be responsible. Doesn't that count for something? I looked at her hand on my arm. This woman who had spent years teaching me about financial responsibility while planning to rob me blind. You taught me that trust is everything, Beverly. You taught me that family means looking out for each other. You taught me that stealing is wrong no matter how desperate you are. So yes, it counts for something. It makes what you did even worse. I pulled my arm away and headed for the door. Where are you going? Mom called after me. To the Harrison Industries Fraud Department. I have an appointment to give a formal statement about the theft of my pension benefits. The kitchen erupted in protests. Mom started crying. Dad started lecturing me about family loyalty. Beverly started begging me to reconsider, promising she'd find a way to pay back every penny if I just gave her a chance. But I wasn't listening anymore. For the first time in my adult life, I was thinking clearly, without the fog of family obligation that had clouded every major decision I'd ever made. You have until tomorrow morning to decide if you want to turn yourself in voluntarily, I told Beverly. After that, I'm cooperating fully with whatever federal investigation Harrison Industries decides to pursue. You can't do this to your own family, Dad shouted after me. I stopped at the threshold and turned back one last time. She already did it, to me. The drive back to Columbus gave me 2 hours to think about what had just happened and what I was about to do. My phone buzzed constantly with calls and texts from my parents, but I ignored them all. I knew they'd spend the day trying to figure out how to protect Beverly while convincing me to sacrifice my own financial security for the sake of family peace.
I'd spent 37 years being the responsible one, the understanding one, the one who put family harmony above her own needs. I'd accepted less attention because Beverly needed more. I celebrated her successes while my own accomplishments went unnoticed. I trusted her with my most sensitive financial information because she was family, and family was supposed to protect each other. But protection was supposed to go both ways. Loyalty was supposed to be mutual. Trust was supposed to be earned and maintained, not exploited for personal gain. When I arrived at the Harrison Industries building, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in my life, I was prioritizing my own well-being over my family's comfort. It felt terrifying and liberating at the same time. The Fraud Investigation Office was located on the 14th floor, and Linda Vasquez, the investigator assigned to my case, turned out to be a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd heard every possible excuse for financial fraud. Ms. Mitchell, before we begin, I want you to understand that this conversation is being recorded, and anything you tell me may be used in both civil and criminal proceedings. You have the right to have an attorney present.
I understand, I said. I don't need an attorney because I haven't done anything wrong. Over the next 3 hours, I told Linda everything. How Beverly had asked me to sign forms for her pension consulting work, how I'd trusted her completely because she was family and had always been the most financially responsible person I knew. How I'd discovered the fraudulent withdrawals when I checked my account. How Beverly had admitted to taking over $130,000 from my pension fund. Linda took detailed notes and asked precise questions about dates, amounts, and specific conversations. She was particularly interested in the fact that Beverly had been using the stolen money to fund a lifestyle she couldn't afford on her legitimate pension income. "Miss Mitchell," Linda said when we finished, "I want you to know that this is a very serious case of pension fraud. The amount involved, the systematic nature of the deception, and the fact that it crosses state lines makes this a federal matter. I'll be forwarding your statement to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. What happens next? They'll likely want to interview you again, and they may ask you to help gather additional evidence. Has your aunt attempted to contact you since you confronted her this morning?" "Not yet, but my parents have been calling constantly." Linda leaned forward. People who commit this kind of fraud rarely just disappear quietly, especially when family is involved. When she does reach out, the FBI may ask you to record those conversations. As I drove home that evening, my phone rang. Beverly's name appeared on the screen. I answered on speaker and grabbed a notebook, remembering Linda's advice about documenting everything. "Cameron, thank God you answered," Beverly said, her voice shaky with panic. "I've been thinking about what happened this morning, and you're right. I made terrible decisions. I violated your trust in the worst possible way." "What do you want, Beverly?" "I want to make this right. I know I can't undo what I did, but I can try to fix it. Your parents and I have been talking, and we think we can get a loan against the house to pay back some of the money." "Some of it?" "Well, we can't come up with a full amount right away, but if you could just delay filing the report for a few months, give us time to figure out a payment plan." "Beverly, I already filed the report. I gave a statement to Harrison Industries this afternoon." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought she might have hung up. "You what?" she finally whispered. I told them everything. About the fraudulent withdrawal paperwork, about your admissions, about the $130,000 you stole. The FBI is taking over the case because it involves federal pension fraud. "Cameron, how could you—" Her voice broke. "I'm your aunt. I practically raised you. How could you destroy your own family over money?" "I didn't destroy our family, Beverly. You did. When you decided my financial security was worth less than your comfortable retirement. But I love you. I've always loved you like you were my own daughter. If you loved me, you wouldn't have stolen my future. If you loved me, you would have asked for help instead of just taking what you wanted. If you loved me, you would have considered how losing my pension would affect my life." She started crying again.
Please, Cameron, please call them back and tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you misunderstood what I was doing. I'll pay back every penny, I swear on my mother's grave. You can't pay back money you've already spent on cars and trips and clothes. And even if you could, that wouldn't change the fact that you committed federal crimes using my identity. Then what am I supposed to do? For the first time in our relationship, I felt like I held all the power. The woman who had taught me about financial responsibility was asking me for advice on how to handle the consequences of her own financial crimes. You're supposed to hire a criminal defense attorney. You're supposed to turn yourself in to the FBI. You're supposed to take responsibility for what you did instead of expecting me to sacrifice my future to protect you from the consequences. I can't go to prison, Cameron. I'm 68 years old. I wouldn't survive it. You should have thought about that before you decided to commit federal crimes. I hung up and immediately called the number Linda Vasquez had given me for the FBI agent assigned to the case. Agent Robert Chen answered on the second ring. Miss Mitchell, is everything all right? My aunt just called trying to get me to recant my statement. I recorded the conversation. Smart thinking. Can you email me that recording? As I sent the audio file to Agent Chen, I realized that somewhere in the past 24 hours, I'd stopped being afraid. The constant anxiety that had characterized my relationship with my family for 37 years had been replaced by something I'd never experienced before. Clarity. I wasn't the problem. I wasn't being vindictive or cruel. I wasn't destroying my family over money. I was finally standing up for myself after a lifetime of being taken advantage of by the people who claimed to love me most. And it felt like the first honest thing I'd done in years. The FBI office in downtown Columbus was nothing like I had expected. Instead of the intimidating government building I'd imagined, it was a modern office complex that could have housed any corporate headquarters. Agent Robert Stevens, who had taken over my case from the initial investigator, met me in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Scioto River. Miss Mitchell, I want to thank you for your cooperation in this investigation, the agent said as he settled into his chair across from me. The recording you provided from your aunt's phone call has been very helpful in building our case.
It had been a week since I'd given my statement to Harrison Industries, and the federal investigation was moving faster than I'd anticipated. Agent Stevens had called me that morning asking if I could come in to review additional evidence they'd uncovered. What kind of evidence? I asked. Agent Stevens opened a thick manila folder and spread several documents across the conference table. We've been working with Harrison Industries to review all transactions associated with your pension account, and we've discovered that your aunt's fraudulent activities were far more extensive than either of you initially realized. He pointed to a spreadsheet showing dates, amounts, and locations. Over the past 18 months, she's been systematically draining not just your pension benefits, but also accessing your 401k contributions and employee stock purchase plan. The total amount of fraud we've documented so far is approaching $215,000. I stared at the numbers on the page, feeling like the room was tilting. $215,000, nearly $250,000 stolen from my retirement accounts over 18 months. That's impossible, I said weakly. She told me she'd only taken money for 6 months. Agent Stevens nodded grimly. People who commit this kind of fraud rarely tell the truth about the full scope of their crimes, even when they're caught. They minimize their actions to protect themselves psychologically and legally. He flipped to another page showing bank deposits. We've traced the stolen funds to 3 different accounts, one in Fort Lauderdale, under your name, one in Columbus, under her name, and one in Cleveland under an alias she's been using. She's been moving money between accounts to avoid detection and using the Cleveland account to make large purchases. What kind of purchases? A timeshare in Myrtle Beach, a boat, jewelry. She also invested heavily in cryptocurrency, though those investments lost significant value over the past year. I felt nauseous. While I'd been working overtime and living modestly to build my retirement security,
Beverly had been living like a millionaire on my stolen money. The timeshare, the boat, the jewelry, all purchased with funds that were supposed to sustain me for 30 years after I stopped working. There's more, Agent Stevens continued. We've discovered that your aunt has been running similar schemes with at least 3 other family members and former coworkers. She's been using her reputation as a pension consultant to gain access to other people's retirement accounts. Other people? Your cousin Danny in Michigan, her former supervisor at Millbrook Steel, and a neighbor whose husband died last year, leaving her to manage his pension benefits alone. Agent Stevens showed me another set of documents. The total fraud across all victims is over $500,000. I slumped back in my chair, overwhelmed by the scope of Beverly's crimes. This wasn't a desperate woman making a poor decision in a moment of crisis. This was a calculated criminal enterprise that had been operating for years. Why didn't anyone catch this sooner? Pension fraud is often difficult to detect because the victims aren't typically monitoring their accounts closely. Most people your age check their retirement balances once or twice a year at most. By the time they notice discrepancies, significant damage has already been done. Agent Stevens closed the folder and leaned forward. Ms. Mitchell, I need you to understand that this investigation is going to get more complex before it gets resolved. We'll need you to testify before a grand jury, and if this goes to trial, you'll be a key witness for the prosecution. Your family is likely to put significant pressure on you to drop the charges or refuse to cooperate. They already are, I said quietly. Since my confrontation with Beverly the week before, my parents had been calling me constantly, alternating between guilt trips and angry demands that I fix this mess. My mother had left a voicemail saying Beverly had chest pains from the stress and might need to be hospitalized. My father had sent a text message calling me vindictive and cruel for destroying an old woman's life over money. None of them seemed to understand that this wasn't about money. This was about a systematic betrayal of trust that went beyond financial theft. Have any of them attempted to intimidate you or interfere with the investigation? Not intimidate exactly, but they keep calling and asking me to reconsider, to think about what this will do to the family, to remember all the good things Beverly has done over the years. That's actually a form of witness tampering, Agent Stevens said. If they continue pressuring you to change your testimony or drop the charges, let me know immediately. After my meeting with the FBI, I drove back to my apartment feeling like I was living someone else's life. The woman who had walked into that conference room was the same person I'd always been, responsible, trusting, eager to maintain family harmony. But the woman who walked out was beginning to understand that those very qualities had made me an ideal target for exploitation. I called in sick for work for the first time in 3 years and spent the day researching therapists who specialized in family trauma and financial abuse. I'd never considered therapy before, but Agent Stevens had recommended it, saying that victims of family financial crimes often struggled with guilt and self-blame that could interfere with their ability to participate in prosecutions. Dr. Sarah Hartman's office was located in a converted Victorian house in German Village, and she turned out to be a woman in her early 40s with gentle eyes and the kind of presence that immediately made you feel safe. When I explained my situation during our first session, she listened without judgment or surprise. Financial abuse by family members is more common than most people realize. The victims are often the most responsible, caring members of the family, the ones who are trusted with important information, and who prioritize family relationships over their own financial security.
I keep thinking I should have seen it coming, I admitted. There were so many red flags, but I ignored them all because I trusted her. Trust isn't a character flaw, Cameron. The problem wasn't that you trusted your aunt. The problem was that she chose to exploit that trust for personal gain. Dr. Hartman helped me understand that what Beverly had done was a form of psychological manipulation as well as financial theft. She'd spent years establishing herself as the family's financial expert,
earning my trust and gathering information about my retirement accounts. She'd used my love for her and my desire to help family members as weapons against me. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you learn to trust your own judgment again. You learn to set boundaries with family members who prioritize the abuser's comfort over your well-being. And you learn that seeking justice isn't the same as seeking revenge." Over the next several weeks, I had to learn to live with the constant pressure from my family. My mother called daily with updates on Beverly's deteriorating health, insisting that the stress of the investigation was literally killing her. My father alternated between angry lectures about family loyalty and emotional appeals about preserving Beverly's dignity in her golden years. My cousin Danny, who I learned was also one of Beverly's victims, called to beg me to drop the charges. "She's family, Cameron. We protect family. If we send her to prison, what does that say about who we are as people?" I wanted to ask him what it said about us that we'd allowed Beverly to steal from multiple family members for years without consequences. But I learned that questioning the family's protection of Beverly was seen as betrayal rather than common sense. The most painful call came from my childhood friend Jessica, whose mother was Beverly's neighbor and had apparently been another victim of her pension fraud. "My mom lost everything," Jessica said, crying into the phone. "Beverly convinced her to sign papers that gave her access to my dad's pension after he died. She stole every penny my mom had for retirement. But now my mom is begging me not to cooperate with the FBI because she doesn't want to cause trouble for such a nice woman." That conversation crystallized something for me. Beverly hadn't just stolen money. She'd stolen these women's ability to trust their own judgment. She'd convinced them that seeking justice for her crimes would make them bad people, that protecting their abuser was more important than protecting themselves. 3 weeks after my first FBI interview, Agent Stevens called with an update. "We've executed search warrants on your aunt's home and vehicles," he said. "We found extensive documentation of her fraudulent activities, including forged signatures, false identification documents, and detailed records of the accounts she's been accessing illegally." "What kind of records?" "She kept a spreadsheet tracking every fraudulent transaction, every victim, and every dollar she stole. It's like she was running a business, complete with profit and loss statements." The idea that Beverly had been treating her crimes as a business venture rather than desperate acts of survival made me feel sick. This wasn't an old woman struggling to pay her bills. This was a criminal who had systematically exploited her family's trust for personal gain. "There's more," Agent Stevens continued. "We've found evidence that she's been planning to flee to Costa Rica. She had flight reservations for next month and had been converting stolen funds into untraceable cryptocurrency that could be accessed from anywhere in the world." The revelation that Beverly had been planning to disappear with her victims' money was the final straw for me. While I'd been agonizing over whether to pursue charges against my own aunt, she'd been making plans to take the money and run, leaving all of us to deal with the financial devastation she had caused. That evening, my parents called for what felt like the 100th time since the investigation began. "Cameron, we need to talk about this situation with Beverly," my father said, without preamble. "The family has been discussing it, and we think the best thing for everyone would be for you to drop the charges." "The family?" I repeated. "Which family members exactly? The ones Beverly stole from, or the ones who haven't been affected?" "All of us," my mother chimed in. "We've talked to Danny and Mrs. Patterson, and everyone agrees that sending Beverly to prison won't solve anything. She's agreed to pay back whatever she can." "With what money?" I interrupted. "She spent everything on boats and timeshares and vacations. She was planning to flee to Costa Rica next month with whatever money she hadn't already squandered." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "How did you know about Costa Rica?" my father finally asked. "Because the FBI found her travel plans when they searched her house, along with detailed records of everyone she stole from and every crime she committed.
This isn't some poor old lady who made a mistake, Dad. This is a criminal who's been running a fraud operation for years. She's still your aunt, my mother said, her voice breaking. She still loves you. Doesn't that count for something? I thought about Dr. Hartman's words about trust and exploitation, about how love wasn't supposed to be used as a weapon against the people you claimed to care about. If she loved me, she wouldn't have stolen my future, I said. If she loved any of us, she wouldn't have spent years planning to take our money and disappear to another country. Love doesn't look like systematic theft and betrayal. We raised you to value family above everything else, my father said angrily. We taught you that blood is thicker than water. You also raised me to believe that stealing is wrong no matter who does it. You taught me that actions have consequences and that being family doesn't give you the right to hurt people without accountability.
I could hear my mother crying in the background. "What do you want us to do, Cameron?" my father asked. "Just abandon her? Let her go to prison and pretend she never existed?" "I want you to stop asking me to sacrifice my financial security to protect someone who chose to commit crimes," I said. "I want you to stop making me feel guilty for seeking justice when I'm the victim. And I want you to understand that dropping the charges wouldn't just be wrong. It would be illegal, now that the FBI is involved." After I hung up, I realized that somewhere in the past month, I'd stopped caring whether my family approved of my decisions. The constant anxiety that had characterized my relationship with them for 37 years had been replaced by something I'd never experienced before: confidence in my own judgment. I wasn't being vindictive or cruel. I wasn't destroying my family over money. I was finally standing up for myself after a lifetime of being exploited by someone who had used my love and trust as tools for financial gain. 2 days later, Agent Stevens called with the news I'd been both expecting and dreading. "We've arrested your aunt," he said without preamble. "She was attempting to board a flight to Miami when we took her into custody. She had over $40,000 in cash and cryptocurrency access codes for accounts containing another $60,000. I sat down heavily in my office chair. She was really going to run. She had a one-way ticket to Costa Rica and had been liquidating assets for weeks. If we'd waited much longer, she would have been gone, and recovering any of the stolen funds would have been nearly impossible. The reality of Beverly's plans hit me like a physical blow. While my family had been pressuring me to protect her from the consequences of her crimes, she'd been finalizing plans to steal even more money and disappear forever. If I had listened to them, if I had dropped the charges and tried to handle this within the family, I would have lost everything. "What happens now?" I asked. "She'll be arraigned tomorrow morning. The prosecution is offering a plea deal, 8 years in federal prison in exchange for full restitution and cooperation with ongoing financial crimes investigations." 8 years. It seemed like both too much and not enough. After I hung up with Agent Stevens, I sat in my office trying to process what I was feeling. It wasn't satisfaction, exactly, though there was an element of justice being served. It wasn't sadness, though I was mourning the aunt that I'd thought I'd had. It was something else entirely. It was relief. For the first time in months, I wasn't worried about what Beverly might do next, whether she was planning more crimes, or whether my family would convince me to enable her destructive behavior. She was in custody, the stolen money was being recovered, and the investigation was finally moving toward resolution. That evening, I called Dr. Hartman and scheduled an extra session. "How are you feeling about your aunt's arrest?" she asked when I explained what had happened. "Free," I said, surprising myself with the honesty of the answer. For the first time in my adult life, I made a decision based on what was right rather than what would keep my family happy. And it feels terrifying and liberating at the same time. What feels terrifying about it? Knowing that my relationship with my parents may never recover from this,
knowing that some family members will never forgive me for refusing to protect Beverly from the consequences of her crimes. And what feels liberating? I thought about it for a moment, knowing that I'm finally putting my own well-being first, knowing that I trusted my own judgment instead of letting family pressure override my sense of right and wrong, knowing that I'm not responsible for cleaning up someone else's mess just because we shared DNA. Dr. Hartman smiled. That sounds like significant progress. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the woman I'd been just 2 months ago. Anxious to please, desperate for family approval, willing to sacrifice anything to maintain harmony. Then I thought about the woman I was becoming. Confident, independent, comfortable setting boundaries even when it disappointed people I loved. The transformation hadn't been easy. Learning to trust my own judgment after years of deferring to family wisdom had required courage I didn't know I possessed. But every difficult conversation, every boundary I'd set, every moment I'd chosen justice over family comfort had been worth it. I was finally becoming the person I was meant to be instead of the person my family needed me to be. And tomorrow, I would watch Beverly face the consequences of treating that person like a resource to be exploited rather than a human being deserving of respect and protection. 4 months later, I stood in the hallway outside Federal Courtroom 3A, watching my family huddled together on a wooden bench like survivors of a natural disaster. My mother clutched a package of tissues, my father stared at the marble floor with hollow eyes, and between them sat Beverly in an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, looking frail and defeated in a way I'd never seen before. She was about to plead guilty to 12 counts of pension fraud, identity theft, and wire fraud across 3 states. The final tally of her crimes had reached $287,000 in stolen retirement funds from 5 different victims, money that had funded her lavish lifestyle while her victims worked overtime to rebuild what she had systematically destroyed. I wasn't there to support her. I was there to make sure the judge understood exactly what she'd taken from me. Agent Stevens had explained that victim impact statements were my opportunity to tell the court how Beverly's crimes had affected my life. He'd warned me that my family would probably be in the courtroom and that hearing what I had to say might be difficult for everyone involved.
You don't have to do this, he'd said during our final preparation meeting. The prosecution has more than enough evidence to proceed without your statement. I want to do it, I'd replied. For 37 years, no one has ever asked how her decisions affected me. Today, someone finally will. Now, standing in that marble hallway, I watched my parents notice me for the first time. My mother's face crumpled with fresh tears. My father's expression hardened with the same anger I'd seen for months. And Beverly? Beverly looked at me with something I'd never seen from her before. Genuine fear. Not fear of prison, though I was sure that terrified her. Fear of me. Fear of what I'd become in the months since I'd stopped being her safety net. The courtroom was more imposing than I'd expected from television dramas. Judge Margaret Thornfield presided from behind a massive oak bench, her gray hair pulled back severely and her steel blue eyes missing nothing as she reviewed the case file. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney David Martinez, had prepared me for what to expect, but sitting in the gallery looking out at my family felt surreal. Judge Thornfield reviewed the charges methodically. 12 felony counts, 3 states, nearly $300,000 in fraudulent claims. Each number felt like a vindication of my decision to come forward, proof that Beverly's actions were far more serious than the family misunderstanding my parents had tried to convince me to overlook. When Beverly stood to enter her plea, her voice was barely audible. "Guilty, Your Honor." "Ms. Mitchell, do you understand that by entering this plea, you are admitting to systematically defrauding pension systems and retirement accounts using false documentation and stolen identities, and that these actions constitute serious federal crimes?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And do you understand that this plea agreement requires you to pay full restitution of $287,000 and serve a minimum of 7 years in federal prison?"
Yes, Your Honor. 7 years. More than I'd expected, but somehow still not enough time to undo the damage she'd caused to 5 different families. At this time, Judge Thornfield continued, the court will hear victim impact statements. We'll begin with Cameron Mitchell, the defendant's niece, and the primary victim of these crimes. I walked to the podium on legs that felt steadier than I'd expected, acutely aware of my family's eyes on my back. I'd written and rewritten my statement dozens of times, but now, standing before the judge with Beverly in shackles 20 feet away, I set aside my prepared remarks and spoke from the heart. Your Honor, my name is Cameron Mitchell, and Beverly Mitchell is my aunt. For most of my life, that relationship has defined me in ways that I'm only now beginning to understand. I glanced at my family, then back at the judge. When I was 10 years old, my aunt taught me how to balance a checkbook. She explained the importance of saving for retirement, of building financial security that would sustain me through my golden years. She taught me that trust was the foundation of all financial relationships, and that family members who handled each other's money bore a sacred responsibility to protect those who depended on them. My mother made a soft sound of distress from the gallery, but I didn't turn around. The pension fraud that brings us here today isn't an isolated incident or a desperate mistake. It was the culmination of years of systematic planning and exploitation. When I trusted my aunt enough to make her an authorized representative on my retirement accounts, I believed I was helping family. What I didn't know was that she was using that trust to steal nearly $300,000 from my future. I paused, feeling the weight of the courtroom's attention. For 18 months, while I worked overtime and lived modestly to build my retirement security, my aunt was living like a millionaire on my stolen money. She bought timeshares, boats, and jewelry. She took expensive vacations and invested in cryptocurrency. When I discovered what she was doing and confronted her, her first instinct wasn't to apologize or take responsibility. It was to ask me to lie to federal investigators to protect her. Judge Thornfield nodded for me to continue. Your Honor, this case isn't just about pension fraud. It's about a woman who spent years cultivating trust specifically so she could exploit it for personal gain. She didn't just steal money from retirement accounts. She stole her victims' sense of security, their ability to trust their own judgment, and their faith in family relationships. I looked directly at Beverly for the first time since entering the courtroom. She was crying silently, but I felt no urge to comfort her. When the FBI arrested my aunt, she was attempting to flee to Costa Rica with over $100,000 in cash and cryptocurrency. She had spent months planning to disappear with her victims' money, leaving all of us to deal with the financial devastation she had caused. If I had listened to my family's pleas to handle this privately, if I had dropped the charges to preserve family harmony, she would have succeeded in stealing everything and vanishing without consequences. I returned my gaze to the judge. I hope the sentence you impose today sends a clear message that exploiting family relationships to commit financial crimes has serious consequences. I hope it gives the other victims the justice they deserve, and I hope it gives all of us the peace of mind to rebuild our lives without wondering when the next betrayal will come. I returned to my seat in the gallery, sitting as far from my family as possible. Judge Thornfield took several minutes to review her notes before addressing Beverly.
Miss Mitchell, the crimes you've committed represent a profound betrayal of trust on multiple levels. You betrayed the trust of pension systems designed to provide security for hardworking people. You betrayed the trust of your victims, who relied on your expertise to protect their financial futures. And perhaps most seriously, you betrayed the trust of your own family members, who loved you enough to give you access to their most sensitive financial information. Beverly nodded, tears streaming down her face. The court sentences you to 84 months in federal prison, followed by 4 years of supervised probation. You are ordered to pay full restitution of $287,000 to your victims, and you are permanently barred from working in any capacity that involves handling other people's financial accounts or retirement benefits. 7 years. Just over 7 years in federal prison, during which time she'd be too old to rebuild any kind of criminal enterprise when she got out. As the bailiff led Beverly away,
She turned back one last time to look at my parents, then at me. I saw her mouth the words, "I'm sorry," in my direction, but I didn't respond. Some betrayals were too profound to fix with an apology. Outside the courthouse, my parents were waiting for me by the stone steps. My mother's face was blotchy from crying, and my father looked like he'd aged a decade in the past hour. "Are you satisfied now?" Dad asked, his voice bitter with the same anger he'd carried for months. "Your aunt is going to prison for 7 years because of you." "She's going to prison because she committed federal crimes," I replied calmly. "I didn't make her steal from 5 different families. I didn't make her plan to flee the country with stolen money. I just refused to lie for her when she got caught." "She made mistakes," Mom said, her voice breaking. "She's an old woman who got confused about money. She kept detailed spreadsheets tracking every dollar she stole from every victim. She had backup plans for accessing money from Costa Rica. That's not confusion. That's organized crime." Dad stepped closer, his face flushed with the same righteous anger he'd shown for months. "You raised us to value family above everything else. You taught us that blood is thicker than water. You also taught me that stealing is wrong no matter who does it. You taught me that actions have consequences and that being family doesn't give you the right to hurt people without accountability." "She's going to die in prison," Mom sobbed. "She's 68 years old. 7 years might as well be a life sentence." "She's going to live in prison," I corrected. "Her victims are going to live with the financial damage she caused for the rest of their lives. Mrs. Patterson lost her late husband's entire pension and is working at 73 because Beverly stole her retirement. My cousin Danny had to move back in with his parents because Beverly destroyed his credit. I'm 7 years behind on my retirement savings because of the money she stole from me." I looked at these people who had raised me, who had shaped every decision I'd made for the first 37 years of my life, and felt nothing but pity for them. "For months, you've been asking me to sacrifice my financial future to protect someone who was planning to steal even more money and disappear to another country. You've been telling me that seeking justice makes me vindictive and cruel. But you've never once asked how I'm doing, whether I'm okay, or if I need support dealing with the trauma of being betrayed by someone I trusted completely." "That's not fair," Dad began. "What's not fair is expecting me to protect someone who committed crimes against me. What's not fair is making me feel guilty for refusing to enable a criminal just because she's family. What's not fair is spending 7 months trying to convince me that I'm the problem in this situation." I started walking toward my car, then turned back one last time. "Beverly will be out of prison in 7 years. She'll get a second chance to build a life based on honest work instead of exploiting people who love her. I hope she takes it. But either way, she won't be doing it at my expense anymore." I drove away without looking back, leaving them standing on the courthouse steps looking lost and broken. For the first time in my life, their disappointment in me felt like freedom. 6 months later, I received a letter from Beverly, forwarded to my attorney since I'd made it clear I wanted no direct contact. In it, she wrote about how sorry she was, how much she regretted her actions, how she hoped someday I could forgive her. She promised to pay back every penny of the restitution, to get help for her problems, to become the aunt I deserved. I read it once, then shredded it, without responding. Some relationships couldn't be repaired, and some people couldn't be saved. Beverly would have to live with the consequences of her choices, and my parents would have to live with the reality of having enabled a criminal. Those weren't my problems anymore. 1 year after Beverly's sentencing, I bought my first house, a craftsman bungalow in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus with a large garden and a view of the woods. I could afford it because I was no longer sending money to family members in crisis or paying for expenses that weren't mine. The pension funds that the FBI had recovered were growing again, building toward the retirement security that Beverly had tried to steal. I decorated the house exactly the way I wanted, with built-in bookshelves and a home office where I could work on the accounting degree I'd decided to pursue part-time. I hosted dinner parties for colleagues and neighbors who valued my company rather than my willingness to solve their problems. I traveled to places I'd always wanted to see, but never thought I could afford.
For the first time in my adult life, every decision I made was mine. Dr. Hartman helped me understand that healing from family trauma was an ongoing process, not a destination. There were still days when I felt guilty for abandoning my family, moments when I questioned whether I'd been too harsh. But those moments became fewer and farther between as I built a life based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than obligation and exploitation. I learned to trust my own judgment again. I learned to say no without feeling guilty. I learned to form relationships with people who valued what I brought to their lives rather than what they could take from me. Most importantly, I learned that protecting yourself from people who exploit your love isn't selfish. It's survival. 18 months after Beverly's sentencing, Agent Stevens called to tell me that my aunt's cooperation with ongoing financial crimes investigations had helped them shut down a network of pension fraud schemes operating across the Midwest. Apparently, prison had given Beverly time to think about the damage she'd caused, and she decided to help law enforcement in exchange for better prison conditions. "She seems genuinely remorseful," Agent Stevens said. "Her counselor says she's been participating actively in therapy and working on understanding how her actions affected other people." "That's good," I said, and meant it. "I hope she learns to build a life that doesn't depend on exploiting other people." "Do you think you'll ever reconcile with her?" I considered the question for a long moment. I hope she gets the help she needs and finds a way to live honestly when she gets out. But my life is better without people who see me as a resource to be exploited, rather than a person to be valued. Maybe that will change someday, but I'm not holding my breath. After I hung up, I sat in my garden with a cup of coffee, watching the sunset filter through the oak trees at the edge of my property. I thought about the woman I'd been 2 years ago. Anxious, desperate for family approval, willing to sacrifice anything for harmony. Then I thought about the woman I'd become, confident, independent, surrounded by people who chose to be in my life rather than people who expected me to serve theirs. The transformation hadn't been easy. Breaking free from family patterns that had been established over decades required courage I didn't know I possessed. But every difficult conversation, every boundary I'd set, every moment I'd chosen my own well-being over someone else's convenience had been worth it. 3 months later, my mother called. It was the first time I'd heard from either parent since Beverly's sentencing, and I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. "Cameron?" Her voice was tentative, uncertain. "I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but I wanted you to know that your father and I have been going to counseling. To try to understand what happened, to try to understand how we failed you." I didn't respond immediately, too surprised by the admission to know what to say. She continued, "We never realized how much pressure you put on you to fix other people's problems. We never understood that asking you to protect Beverly was asking you to sacrifice your own future. We thought we were teaching you about family loyalty, but we were really teaching you that your needs didn't matter as much as everyone else's." "Mom!" She interrupted. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking you to come back or pretend this never happened. I just wanted you to know that we understand now. We understand that you were right to protect yourself, and we're sorry it took us so long to see it." After we hung up, I realized that for the first time in 2 years, I felt at peace with my family. Not because we'd reconciled or because they had apologized, but because they'd finally acknowledged the truth about what had happened. They'd finally admitted that protecting Beverly meant sacrificing me, and that asking me to enable her crimes was wrong. I didn't call them back or rush to repair our relationship. Some damage took time to heal, and some trust had to be rebuilt slowly. But for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt like maybe someday we could have a relationship based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. As I finished my coffee and headed inside to prepare for another day at my new job, a position at a financial planning firm where I helped other people protect their retirement accounts from fraud, I reflected on how much my life had changed.
I was finally free. Free from the constant anxiety of wondering what crisis would become my responsibility next. Free from the guilt of never being enough for people who saw me as a solution to their problems rather than a person deserving of love and respect. Free from the exhaustion of maintaining relationships that drained more than they gave. Most importantly, I was free to be myself, not the person my family needed me to be, but the person I chose to become. And I was never going back. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.